All right. Good day, everybody. Welcome to our installation of Java with Otava. Today, we'll be discussing ransomware and risk mitigation. We're joined today by a few esteemed panelists here. I'm going to start by letting them introduce themselves. Brandon, let's start with you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm Brandon McCoy, a system engineer at Veeam Software, support our Veeam service and cloud providers, and I've been at Veeam for about 4 years. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia.
Perfect. Jason, over to you, please.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Jason Duchnowski, or JD for short. I'm a product manager at Otava. I've been here for about 3 years now. And my responsibilities include our backup services, disaster recovery, and now also security. Excited to be here.
Fantastic. And last but not least, team, my name is Jeremy Bigler. I'll be moderating today's discussion and look forward to having a discussion. Let's keep this open-ended. Feel free to use the Q&A component within the webinar to ask any questions that may come up, and we'll get those answered straight away for you. Let's start by reviewing today our agenda. We're going to start by defining a little bit about some of the explanation and risk factors behind ransomware. And then we're going to go really into the meat of the discussion around recommendations for how organizations can protect yourselves from a technical point of view, from a business aspect, and last but not least, we'll introduce solutions that Otava has that can help you in that journey towards a more protected end state. Let's start, though, by talking a little bit about what some of these organizations here have in common. Any ideas? Feel free to jump in with the comments section or in the Q&A section. Brandon, why don't we review a little bit? What are some of the things that these companies have in common?
Well, I would imagine that they all have data, and that data is pretty much the lifeblood of their company. And I would imagine, and I actually am guessing here, that they have been affected by ransomware.
That is correct. Unfortunately, all of these folks here, including the fruit in the middle of the slide, have been compromised in recent days. And I think this is a little bit sobering, folks, as we think about these organizations. We look at some of these as being industry leaders in their various segments and their various markets, right? But I think it just goes to prove that no one is truly risk-free. And it does provide a sobering perspective on the level of risk that we may be facing if organizations such as this have already fallen prey to ransomware attacks. Driving into that a little bit deeper, Brandon, any ones on here come to mind that you think would be cogent to share with the folks today?
So there's a lot of them. They're hard to keep up with. There's actually a few that aren't on here that I saw within the last month. There was the Microsoft hack called Hafnium. Over 250,000 users were hit by that. A couple weeks ago, there was a disgruntled employee who still had access to the Office 365 admin side after he was let go and decided to delete 1,200 Office 365 mailboxes. And then before that, there was a Teams one as well, where actually it was Microsoft. It was a Microsoft bug, just randomly deleting data. Those are some of the big ones that I'm more aware of.
JD, how about you? Any perspectives here that we'd like to share?
I mean, there are websites that publish lists of attacks and data breaches that are out there. I think that it's probably a lot larger than what people might think about. Just kind of on the offset, we see stuff that's published out in the news. Those are really the high profile ones, but there are just an accumulating list of data breaches. Hundreds, thousands a month, and the number is actually it grows. So I think the importance of kind of addressing this stuff is it can't be undervalued. So
yeah, and
no specific examples, but I mean you can find examples everywhere, just everywhere.
Absolutely. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Jason, but I didn't see that Baltimore one there. Actually, the ransomware webinar that I used to do on my own, we found that data, and that was the largest one of, I think, 2018, $18.2 million. So like Jason mentioned, this does continue to grow. We'll see some of those slides later on. And so when you see these large numbers, just keep in mind some of these ransomware costs, like the Baltimore one that was 18 million.
And what's interesting in my perspective here, as we think about some of these and the more current ones, Brandon, as you mentioned, right, is we think about service disruption and the cost of disruption, right, as being productivity, brand, et cetera. But this is really hard dollars, right? This is true ransomware. So not only do you have those costs, which are not insignificant in many cases, but now you also are being held hostage by an organization that's demanding a payoff. And that payoff then only exacerbates the financial risk facing organizations today as appropriate to their organization. One of the interesting things that I think we all probably have heard about in the news recently, right, is Apple, right? $50 million ransom. Otherwise, they would release the roadmap for Apple products. And we think about the brand impact there. We think about the intellectual capital impact. That's pretty significant. And again, just showing the fact that even an organization as robust and mature as Apple is still susceptible, in this case has been compromised through a third party. So Brandon, this is an interesting concept, right? Apple itself wasn't victimized, but yet they were exposed to a third party. So maybe you could expound a little bit there on some of the supply chain dependencies that enter into this scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. So, sorry, my camera's going crazy. Yeah, so, one thing that comes to mind right away is the fact that, a lot of people think Apples don't get hacked, or, those kinds of operating systems don't get hacked. The only thing that gets hacked is Windows. That's why a lot of people also think that Linux is safe, right? But we now see that they are writing codes for these different softwares. Anything is really susceptible if it has a connection to the internet, if it's online. And yeah, when you think about these third parties, I know a lot of backup softwares out there, and I won't mention any of them, but some of their stuff isn't in-house, so they rely on these third parties. Those third parties get hacked or corrupted, and then you're now held hostage because you're using this company, say, for your data protection, and you can't get any of your data back because the third party for application restores or whatnot is being hit by something. So it's very interesting. It's not just Apple, it's these supply chains that are connected to Apple, but it's the same kind of end result, right, of the data being compromised.
Sure, and I think we've seen multiple instances of this, right? Starting, back some number of years ago, around just supply chain vulnerabilities, right? And supply chain could be a third-party provider, could be subcontractors that are coming into your organization, right? Could be any actors that have access that aren't necessarily employees, but are provided access into a back office environment that provide a way or a method for ingress of malware or ransomware. So something to think about, folks, as we consider our overall service delivery ecosystem. How well are you validating or vetting vendors and suppliers that you yourselves procure services from in the delivery of your products and services to your markets?
Yeah, Jeremy, just one thing I'll add there. It might surprise people that third-party breaches actually contribute more to the cost of a data breach than if you lost your device that has access to, your company's environment. It's like the fourth or fifth highest amplifier when it comes to, the cost to the business of a data breach. So it's more important than I think a lot of people might think.
That's a good segue, Jason, into our next slide here, right? We think about some of the impacts, right? One of the interesting things here, and we think about this in terms of third-party software vulnerability in the data element that we're reporting on from IBM and Ponemon, but this is really any third-party asset or component in your supply chain. So To that end, Jason, why don't we start by sort of running through some of those top offenders, and then Brandon, I'll ask you to sort of provide some color in terms of how do we think about costs on this in the next slide.
Yeah, a lot of this data was pulled from a Ponemon Institute survey. They go out and actually speak with and interview about 1,000 individuals from a couple hundred companies that actually experience breaches. So this is real data. It's a global study. They've been doing it for a number of years in conjunction with IBM. And so the numbers here are very real, right? $8.64 million average cost of a data breach. That number is actually increasing year over year. And I specifically put in the US because I think a lot of the people on this phone are from the US, and we are not only the biggest targets for cyber attacks, but the industries that are driving this number up are the ones that I think are more critical to our day-to-day lives and just business in general, which are healthcare, financial services. Those are the top two industries when we're talking about data breaches, and they're also number one and number two from a cost perspective. So if you have sensitive data, which we all do, there's always sensitive data in there, but the more sensitive data that you have, the bigger the target that you have on your back, unfortunately. And actually the number of breaches and the penetration of breaches that are happening maliciously, it's increasing every single year. So kind of that middle metric there, you can see on the far right, what is the method that they're using to get in. Basically, what is the vulnerability that they are taking advantage of? Whether it's social engineering through phishing attacks, somebody maliciously on the inside, that's a little bit less common, but just things that aren't configured correctly, or maybe I don't have multi-factor authentication in place. So I can just simply get in through, maybe a brute force attack against password, going against, admin passwords, common passwords, that type of thing. So it is out there. I mean, all this stuff is very real, and I think that we can be desensitized by it sometimes because we do hear it so often. But it's happening, and it's happening in more and more frequency.
Makes sense. I'm going to move ahead here to more about costing. Brandon, I'm curious, right? We see a lot of big numbers on these slides, right? And I don't know how we can always think about making those numbers apply to a typical business scenario or a typical scenario that we might find ourselves in. Can you sort of walk us through what rolls into these larger size numbers here?
Yeah, so if we just go to the middle one, the cost of ransomware, these are really big numbers, and it may also seem like just something we're just throwing out there, but these are stats and facts that are verified. And when you think about how could it cost that much money, well, you go back to the slide a few slides ago we mentioned where we talked about Baltimore being an $18 million attack, right? So you got to think of not only the amount of money that they're asking you for, but also the time, the employees' time that you're wasting while you can't do your business. You like with the case of Baltimore, the city couldn't take payments for online payments. They lost millions of dollars because of that. They actually decided to not pay the ransom and ended up paying millions of dollars. And there's not a guarantee that they would have got that data back, even if they did pay. But yeah, these numbers are very real, and they just continue to rise year after year. From the 4 years that I've been doing this, that previous slide about the 8.64 million per year, that wasn't as high when I started. It's really shot up quite a bit. And then if you look at the the different verticals and sectors, someone was just asking me in this little forum earlier what verticals are likely to be targeted, and really it's all of them, right? Any vertical, any sector is at risk. And so when you think about all the companies out there, not just the big ones, it really can add up quickly.
Sure. And what's also interesting, I think, as you hit on this a little bit with Baltimore, right, is service disruption, service impact, right? We think about the far right stat here, longest time to identify and resolve a breach. right? Think about the service disruption to an organization, especially when we think about some of these verticals, right? What does it cause, right? If we impact an energy organization's ability to deliver energy services to its customers, or a healthcare entity to deliver, life safety and health services to its customers, right? There's real impact to not just the physical cost, but also the service disruption for some of these more sensitive industries. Baltimore, as an example, unable to recognize payments for some period of time. Now, I'm sure they've recovered that later, but there's revenue, there's other impact here than just bottom line cost. One of the things that is interesting also on this data, and we're going to break this down a little bit, is misconfiguration, right? 19% of issues within 2020 were caused by this. JD, can you walk through a little bit here about really some of the misconfiguration and some of the endpoint risks that we see facing organizations today?
Yeah, I think it all kind of comes down to the level of trust that's sort of configured into the environment from the get-go. So, what we have seen in the past is I have a whole bunch of employees that are, working within my premise, and when they plug in or connect to the network, I just sort of automatically have access. So I'm inside of the castle, if you will, so I can walk into any room and I have that access. And previous to I guess in the past, we didn't see as much sort of outside penetration protection outside of like firewalls and other kind of network related sort of protections. And now individuals are starting to be I would say targeted by the malicious attackers, whether they're using social engineering, looking through LinkedIn and Facebook to try and get into either answer the challenge questions, those type of things. But I have all of my workforce is now outside of the castle, and they need to have that same level of access once they get in. So it really is driving, I think, the industry to move towards and as a de facto standard go into a zero trust model, where I have even though maybe I can log in to my machine, I then have to start authenticating with each one of my applications, every single layer of where my data lives, whether it's within my SharePoint environment or my email or some other place. I have different gates that I have to get through in order to access that data. So it's all sort of policy driven. Those types of things are what can really help sort of lock down and minimize the exposure when we're talking about data breaches. So just because I have my physical device, let's say it's a phone that I can access into the environment, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's me that's trying to access it, right? So I have to have sort of multiple ways to prove that it is me. And that's kind of what we're seeing, right? Is I have to have a couple different layers of things, protecting my organization, not just from a physical device proving that it's me, but then all the gates within the company walls to make sure that my my exposure is minimized. So when you're kind of last point I'll make is when you're a malicious attacker, the more steps that I have to go through in order to try and access your data, that is sort of my I'm trying to find a way to sort of say, hey, I'm going to be more difficult to break into than this other guy, so why don't you just move on from me and go on to somebody else. So it's trying to be harder to access than somebody else, kind of at the end of the day.
That's interesting for us to think about, right? Is I think we've all sort of gone into, most recently this pandemic model, thinking that it's a brief period of time, right? There's a stop, and hopefully there's an end date here at some point. But a recent study from VMware, for example, just showed that on average, the enterprise clients they surveyed saw a 67% increase in productivity as a result of allowing workers to enter and work in a disparate, non-centralized model, right? Remote work, home work, whatever that is. And that dramatically increases, I think, our risk landscape, as now we have entities coming into an organization from traditionally what would be considered uncontrolled endpoints. Brandon, I'm curious, what do we see from your perspective here, sort of in the go forward view around endpoint control, and how do we see that sort of adjudicating into this now distributed workforce model that appears to be, dare I say, almost a new normal for workforces today on?
Yeah. So just from a personal perspective, so, we've been working from home here at Veeam for over a year, and there's really no telling whether they're going to reopen the offices. So this may be the new norm. Veeam has implemented a lot of those things that you mentioned, the MFA, and as Jason mentioned, having some multi-factor authentication. So it's good from a security perspective to make sure that any machines that are going to be accessing your company's data or accessing applications are secure, but also just protecting those machines in general, right? So you're working on these home laptops. You can't just go to your IT admin and say, hey, can you fix this for me? I need to resolve this, or I deleted all this. So the Veeam agents, if I can make a shameless plug, that's what we're seeing a lot of uptick. We have agents for Windows, Linux, and Mac. So we're, trying to support all those kind of home operating systems, seeing a huge uptick in that. And it's just becoming more and more important as we're, these laptops are kind of our offices now.
Got it. So folks, we've talked a little bit about sort of the exposure, right? Some of the risk, but we really haven't dove into what ransomware is specifically, outside of some entity that controls our access to data that we have to pay a fee or a price for to unlock. So let's take a few moments and quickly cover really what is the definition of ransomware globally to make sure that we're all on the same page. Brandon, I'm curious if we could start with your view here.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we can see from the definition, it's ransomware is a malicious software that restricts access to the production computer or files on that computer until you've paid the ransom, usually in the form of Bitcoin or some other kind of cryptocurrency. This spreads via cryptovirology. That word's always hard for me to say, even after all these years. It encrypts and holds the data. Now, from a Veeam perspective, we're looking for, deleting of data, not giving you access to the data, but there's also the other side of that, of sensitive data like credit cards and social security numbers that you need to protect from more of a security perspective. And it used different forms of encryption. If you look back to when ransomware first started, it was very crude, very simple. Today, we would laugh at a lot of those kinds of codes and really easily be able to uncrypt. Nowadays, it's not the case. We see ransomware as a service. These things are getting more and more specialized and intricate. And of course, they're all doing this because they assume that that data is something that you want back. So, whether it's the CEO's laptop, maybe they just want a couple $100, or it's, some banking industry and they want hundreds of thousands of dollars. And onto the right, we see a lot of the main ransomware viruses. A lot of these are just a hierarchical view of larger organizations that kind of distribute these different ransomware viruses.
Makes sense. And you raised an interesting point there at the close, Brandon. This is not just now, a board individual trying to cause disruption, right? This is now a focused business process. So that raises the stakes significantly, because now you have actors that are pursuing revenue as a result of ransomware. And that provides another level of maturity, diligence, and focus that was not perhaps present just with rogue elements in past examples. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. I think back to my AOL days, right, where somebody would lock your screen out or something just annoying. And nowadays we've got third-party call centers, right? You don't even have to know what you're doing. You can literally just go on the dark webs, look for these kinds of sources, and they'll give you the codes. They'll take your payment on the line. Even for the victim who has to pay that crypto, they'll call you up, give you instructions. So it's the ransomware as a service is crazy, but it is definitely out there.
Got it. So let's explore a little bit how ransomware comes into or infects our systems. And there are a couple things here that are interesting. Jason, could you walk us through a little bit some of these common elements? And I'm really curious about some of the social aspects of these as well.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly start with maybe the social aspect is, we are constantly pushing data out into the public eye, right? All of our different social accounts, social media. So my Instagrams, my LinkedIn, Twitter, like we're talking about our personal day. We have our networks that are sort of, the people that we interact with. Who am I interacting with the most? All that information is gathered and can be used sort of against you, right? So, in this example here, it's showing, hi, this is Bob from IT. Well, a company's, they may publish out or somebody may gather the information about, what that organization structure looks like, who is where. You could pull that from LinkedIn, for example. So, maybe there is, like I've personally gotten emails from someone that's posing as our CEO asking for, me to go do this chore for him, right? Go out to Best Buy, buy a bunch of, gift cards. And I think that there are people that are vulnerable that would, just go out and do that. So, I think education is really important when we talk about where these sources come from. So social engineering is a big one, just making sure that, hey, if it doesn't look right, it's always good to verify, to make sure that, what's happening is, and what you're seeing is actually legitimate or not. The removable media, there's, you've probably seen and read about things where, a thumb drive was placed like in a bathroom, and they just waited to see, they had cameras to see who would grab the, the thumb drive and take it back to their desk and plug it in just to see kind of what was on the drive, or place it out on the street or wherever, right? You can have malicious code that's running onto that, like a USB drive that can, infect an environment. All I need is that single sort of entry point, and then from there I can sprawl out from that one, system to the rest of the organization. So, there's a lot of different avenues to get in, but I think the big one is just educating people on the different methods, because there are a lot of different methods to getting in, so that they know what to look for. So, and it's constantly evolving, right? Brandon was talking about how simple and straightforward that some of the attack methods were before, and it's just going to keep getting more and more complex. They're going to adjust. So the tools that we use to identify that stuff will, it's just going to be a constant evolution.
It's interesting, talking about thumb drives, right? There was a study done over across the pond in the UK for a bit, and over 50% of folks that were presented that option actually acted on it. They picked up the device and plugged it in. And thankfully,
the human curiosity.
But so we talk a little bit about training, Jason. What are some of the best practices that we can really implement to in a distributed workforce, remote work environment, to keep ourselves safe?
Yeah, in that Ponemon Institute research paper, there's actually a list. They listed out by what can mitigate the cost of a data breach and what can amplify the cost of a data breach. So the preparedness is really the top. They fall into the kind of the top categories of risk mitigations, and the goal is to try and reduce the amount of time from when the data breach happens to when I identify it and when I can resolve it. That life cycle from start to finish has a direct correlation on the cost of the business for that data breach. So one of the big ones is just understanding what is my my threat landscape, right? So performing an analysis of my, my organization, where are the weak points, and then what you're looking to do is solidify the areas that have sort of the biggest opportunity, right? So the most sensitive data, the highest risk, starting there and then working your way down the path from there. Strong passwords and using multi-factor authentication, that's one of the easiest, I think, and most straightforward ways to protect an organization. So there's a lot of different tools out there that provide at least dual factor or multi-factor authentication. Having tools that can monitor for, in the case of ransomware, a lot of data is going to get encrypted. So you see a high change rate of data on certain systems. There are tools that can start detecting that change rate within my data to say, hey, there may be something going on here. So it will help identify that data breach quicker than maybe I would if I didn't have that tool. So a lot of sort of artificial intelligence and analytics tools that can help with speeding not only the identification, but then also remediation. That's a whole nother topic. But I think another kind of fundamental piece is, which is listed at the very bottom there, is having copies or backups of your data in the event that I need to restore because maybe my production data was encrypted by ransomware. Having a copy of your data on different media types, having one offsite in a different location, one that's offline. That copy is typically referred to as having a air gap, right? So in the event that they get within the entire organization, I have it sort of offline and nobody can access it unless it's they're physically there in person. So this is a Veeam role. I don't want to steal Brandon's thunder, so I'll stop there. But it's a great way to kind of protect your business in the event that you need to go back and retrieve data that's been compromised or encrypted.
Yeah, so I think, Jason, you gave Brandon a really good introduction here around the Veeam model for 32110. That model's been around, but Brandon, walk us through that a little bit, because I don't know how many, I think we always thought about this as a 3-2-1 rule, right? But maybe we're missing the 1 and 0 here at the end of it, and help us understand where those fit in the value.
Sure. Yeah. So I've seen this delivered a number of ways, but the 3-2-1 is, I like to keep it simple. So I just say 3-2-1. But as Jason kind of alluded to, 3 copies of your data, not necessarily 3 copies of your backups. So your first copy is the production data itself. The second is on some sort of media with Veeam that's going to be a disk. Usually it's going to be a local disk. So maybe a Windows or Linux repository. And then one offsite, usually that's going to be Cloud Connect. So that's something that you guys offer, and then the one offline, which is also air gapped. And the Cloud Connect could be argued it could be air gapped depending on how you set it up. There's some insider protections and things, but the one offline would be a tape. And then, of course, if you follow this model, you shouldn't have any errors because you're protecting not only against, deletion or ransomware, but also, physical infrastructure like a fire or, some kind of natural disaster power outage. You've got a physical copy somewhere else. So that's kind of the basis of the 3-2-1 rule. And, I talk about 3-2-1 almost every day. So.
Yeah, I think it's a good process to follow. I did see a few questions being asked about this, and we'll cover that, I think, a little bit later in the presentation when we talk about some of the features here. But ransomware protection right in this process, that's why 3-2-1-1-0 exists, is to fully ensure that we have the level of protection that folks would expect and enable appropriate levels of recovery. Before we talk though about the solutions, though, I do want to dive a little bit more into some of the other aspects of protection. One of the things, Jason, you started to talk to this a little bit earlier, is around the concept of zero trust, right? How do I know that I am, when I'm logging into an environment, how does the environment know that I am who in fact I say I am? So can you walk us through a little bit about the zero trust concept and how that impacts specifically a disparate workforce such as we have today?
Yeah, I've done a good job of, I think, stealing my own thunder and stealing other people's thunder. So, yeah, I do want to dive into this a little bit more. I think when we talk about zero trust, it's not an all or one type of a situation. There is sort of a maturity curve when we're looking at this. So there's some very basic things that that organizations can do to help, when it comes to really the premise behind zero trust is just making sure that you don't have access when you shouldn't have access, and limiting access where it should be limited. So when you have all of your workforce, let's just say all of your workforce outside of the four walls, I need to have the ability to just plainly authenticate and understand, who are you, and to help with, I think productivity is having single sign-on across, and that's not just for internal employees, right? I need to have processes for contractors and third parties. We talked about the importance of third party, not just software, but also, organizations I do business with, anybody that can connect in. I need to make sure that whatever the data is that they're accessing is just the data that they need in order to do their job. And that's really where kind of that third box is coming into play, is enforcing those policies and controls to say, what level in the organization are you? What is your job function? And I can sort of pigeonhole you into the data. I mean, it's a bad term, but into the data that you really need to have access to, and kind of no more than that, right? Kind of next step of that is also, if you want to think about, who should have access and when should they have access. Maybe I need to, if an employee leaves, I could, another phase is sort of the evolution of this zero trust is having automation wrapped around it. So when somebody leaves, I automatically start removing access. So that's kind of another layer on top of that. But Brandon or Jeremy, anything else that you would want to add into that? I mean, we talked a little about 3-2-1 already, but yeah, it's a lot of different tools you can do. I think everybody, you kind of have a starting point, and then you can evolve from there as the organization matures.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it on the head there, Jason.
All right. Yeah, the most important part for me, I think, Jason, in thinking about this, right, is understanding, role-based access, right? What should I have access to? It's not a white or black, right? Binary 1-0. It's a very gray around only giving users, especially third parties, right? Subcontractors, suppliers, et cetera, access to only the information and tools that they need to have, and not an open door, closed door. Building on this a little bit, right? Again, going back to the concept of remote workforce now, we have a lot of folks working outside of the brick and mortar, right? We talked about that expansion beyond sort of the walls of the organization out into a distributed workforce. These are just some general recommendations for good security in a home or remote use. But Jason, if you could take us through this briefly and highlight some of the ones that you think are more critical for folks on this slide.
Yeah, we talked about sort of the access and using things like VPNs and multi-factor authentication. Those are some big ones, but from the social engineering protection, teaching employees, hey, these are the things that you should look out for. These are best practices for how you should have your home network set up, right? Don't use the defaults for everything. Sort of like basic, need to assume that, people don't know anything, and your weakest, the weakest link in the chain is your biggest vulnerability. So just trying to level set with to make sure that everybody is kind of working from the same level ground. I think also, having policies about backing up data, copying data to maybe a cloud drive, those types of things to protect my device. Really just kind of basic things I think can go a long way. It doesn't have to be really sophisticated. So, there's just like a few simple things all sort of listed here, and I touch on just a couple of them that a company can implement very quickly to get you in a strong position to prevent yourself from, being vulnerable, being attacked, or at least minimize the opportunity for attack.
I know one tactic that organizations have been adopting lately as almost an insurance policy, right? For if they're compromised, is cyber liability insurance. I think there's a lot of the confusion around what cyber liability actually is, what it covers, what it doesn't cover. Jason, can you give us some detail or some background here?
Yeah, I mean, at the basic level, what cyber liability insurance covers is it's responding to, investigating, and cleaning up, whatever damage is caused by a data breach. And the amount of money that we talked about earlier for the cost of a data breach, the $8+ million, that's an average. The amount of insurance that you need kind of depends on your industry and how many. It really comes down to the number of records, sensitive records that can be compromised. So, if I'm a hospital, how many patients do I have? That type of a thing. So, a lot of instances, I need to have as much coverage as I can afford. I also need to kind of shop around for policies, and that's actually a little bit more difficult than going to a Geico or somebody to understand. Hey, what are my options for cyber liability? Because that person needs to understand, what is my business? Who do I do business with? Where are my risks? They need to be well-versed on kind of how you operate as a business. There's a lot of different examples of where you may not be covered. And, I'd love to go into the detail of that, but, independent contractors, are you covered in the event that your independent contractor does something? There's a lot of assumptions that are made when a policy gets written, where somebody that, again, truly understands your business goes through that, because in the event that you are breached, if you did not answer that policy form correctly or honestly, you may not get any sort of payment back from the insurance company. They could say, hey, that wasn't the case, what you filled out when we built this policy for you, so you're not going to get paid. So be really careful about what that coverage looks like, how you're covered, and how you respond to sort of the policy questionnaire and when that policy is built.
It's a good point, especially about, let's remember, insurance companies are not in the business of paying out, right? They're in the business of protecting their assets. So that honest, frank, and candid response on the application is critical. Remember, team, if you don't actually do what you represent you do on that form, you will likely not get compensated by your insurance broker as a result. So please keep that in mind when you're looking at cyber liability. The other issue here is to make sure you're talking to somebody that is knowledgeable about brokering cyber liability insurance and has a track record in that. Most organizations, as Jason mentioned, don't have that level of expertise. So make sure you're talking to somebody that can help you navigate getting the right protection for your organization, and in a way that ensures that you are in fact protected in the unlikely or unfortunate event of compromise. So with this said, one of the things that obviously we're here with the purposes of exposing how Otava can help organizations today. I'll talk a little bit about our general portfolio, and then we'll dive into some of our data protection and continuity offerings, specifically around not just cyber and ransomware protection, but just general business protection. Otava is, as I'm sure many of you know, a cloud service provider. We serve a global client base across both the U.S. domestic and EMEA. Really in areas of obviously cloud hosting first and foremost, but certainly in this regard, data protection, continuity, security, and then wrapping that around with co-location and professional services. You probably heard us say, right, Otava makes things easy, or Otava easy is our mantra, and that extends obviously into data protection. So Jason, what if you could for a moment, take us a little bit, let's decompress or decompile rather that data protection offering and think a little bit about some of those continuity and data protection offerings.
Yeah, if we want to just kind of visually remember that 3-2-1 rule, that's really what the main purpose behind what this portfolio is doing, right? I want to have a copy of my data locally. I want to get one off site. I have my production data, obviously, different mediums. What we're trying to do here is allow our clients to have the proper protection depending on the importance of my data. So not everything is created equal. Maybe, from a security standpoint, I may want to protect one part of the business and data more than another. It costs me more to have it offline, that type of thing. So we have different solutions, from a disaster recovery where we're a very low RPO and RTO. So I have minimal data loss and very quick time to recover. We can do that in a managed flavor or a self-managed, where we give you the control to handle that disaster recovery failover, but we're here to kind of assist you where you need it. Really where our partnership with Veeam comes into play is that third row, that tier 3, is the Otava Cloud Backup portfolio. It's a full suite of services that covers everything from premise-based backups to cloud-based backups to public cloud-based protection. So we're trying to give our clients a holistic protection for their data, for backing up locally, for offsite. Again, it comes in both sort of a self-managed and a fully managed flavor, depending on your business's technical expertise and desire to manage that sort of day-to-day ongoing for backups and recoveries. And then finally, Data Vault is long-term archive of your data for mainly for compliance, typically what we see. So this is an expanded view of that cloud backup portfolio that I was talking about, having both self-managed and fully managed flavors, where we are protecting your Otava cloud data and machines. We can either give you the option to manage it, we can manage it for you. The SLA, we give granular control to our clients if it is managed by you, where you can set your own SLA policies. And it's a simple pricing model per VM and storage consumed is really what that looks like. If you're a premise-based client, so you have your own data center, or you have remote locations, you can replicate that into our cloud repository. It's managed by you. You handle the restores, you handle the SLA, so you have all that customization at your fingertips. And it's priced simply by the storage that you're consuming in our cloud. So it's a turnkey. These are all purpose-built, designed with best practices. We have a strong partnership with Veeam. And when we come to designing these solutions, and you can trust that they'll be online, available, and performant to your needs from a backup perspective. Finally is the 365 backup, right? So Exchange Online, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams data, protecting that data. We handle the backup for you, where we give you the control for all the restores. There's a lot of different ways to restore. There's a lot of different ways to search through the data. Any kind of legal hold, those types of things are all handled by that solution. Again, that's a Veeam powered solution, where it's a simple per user protected type of a price model. So real quick
Yes,
and
and
dirty there on the backup.
one question that came up, right? We have a question from the audience. They're using Otava today for hosting, but how can they protect their workloads, right? They're in the Otava cloud, but how do they protect their workloads from ransomware or other malware compromise?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest way to do it to start is just to back up your data, right? I need to have a backup solution in place to have, you know, a second set of data in case my production data is encrypted. There's also, you know, one of the big mitigators around, you know, data breaches and ransomware is actually compliance. So adhering to compliance is a big one, and all these solutions that we're showing you here are compliant to a bunch of different standards, and Jeremy was showing that a couple slides earlier. But then also making sure that whatever backups that I have, I'm using that 3-2-1 rule and replicating those to a secondary location, right? Having that offsite is really critical when we're trying to handle things like data breaches, or, you know, I have a disaster, I need to get my data offsite. You could certainly layer on top of that disaster recovery solutions depending on the criticality of data, how quickly I need to restore. Anything that you would add on top of that, Jeremy?
I think the other important aspect, and Brandon, maybe you can go into this a little bit, right, is within the Veeam portfolio, the concept of immutability, and as well as you know, one of the behaviors we see in ransomware in a lot of cases is folks that are writing this code are not immature, right? They understand that backups exist. So one of the first things they try to do is go through and identify if there is a backup of the data, and eliminate or remove the ability for that backup to be utilized. So Brandon, can you take us a little bit into how Veeam protects against that type of behavior?
Yeah, so there's a couple different storage repository options, depending on the flavor that you like, that immutability has. For instance, Linux is a good one. With a Linux repository, we can take the need to keep the credentials saved on the Veeam server. So it's a one-time single sign-on, and then make those backups immutable. We're actually leveraging Linux in the background, which basically says, these backups cannot be deleted, removed, written to. They are read only for the amount of time that you specify. And I think we had a question on our last webinar about this. You know, what if I accidentally set my immutability to, you know, 100 days? Well, you'd have a backup for 100 days, right? So, but at the flip side to that, you know, that data is protected for that amount of time. And there definitely are one ransomware, it's called SAMMAS, or SAMMAS, SAMMAS. And it was a story that we had heard from a customer where that exact thing happened. They did have a backup. Unfortunately, that ransomware looked for that backup file extension and deleted it. This was before they didn't have any kind of, you know, immutability on that.
No, it makes sense. So I think that, and then also right within Cloud Connect, we have the ability not just for immutability in our backup architecture, but also for second site repository to actually lock, even in the event a deletion request is submitted either by us or by a malware or ransomware attack. That data remains unaffected for some period of time, right? Usually 7 to 14 days. Any additional detail, Brandon, that you want to shed in that regard as well?
No, the insider protection is a great feature. I think some people do think that Cloud Connect is air gapped because it's somewhere else, which it is from certain perspectives, like networking. You know, Cloud Connect, you have access to a folder from the customer side, but that's it. And that's where insider protection comes into play. Because if I'm a malicious employee, or maybe just a not too bright employee, and I delete all the backups, I have that ability. All I got to do is log on to Veeam and say, delete all the backups I sent to Otava. And okay, that's what they're going to do. Where this insider protection says, wait a minute, you know, I've got this lock on these backups. So we'll go ahead and delete them from the customer's folder like they asked, but we're going to save it in this admin recycle bin. And then you can call Otava up and they'll restore it for you.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour, Jason. I'm wondering if you could take us sort of quickly through really what our challenge is to our attendees here today.
Yeah, we you know, we've talked about a lot of different concepts. I think that there's still questions that are coming in about, how these solutions can protect from ransomware in other instances. But our challenge is to reach out to us. We want to show you, want to prove to you that this solution can do and meet your needs as a business. We want to talk in detail about any concerns related to ransomware. It's a really strong portfolio of solutions depending on where your data lives. We have sort of the suite along there on the right side of solutions, but we offer clients a 30-day trial, no cost to you, to give these solutions a try and see, will it meet your needs. We want to be able to prove to you that we can back up the data efficiently, that we can restore it quickly, and keep your business safe. So we have that commitment. We are not going to get beat on price, and we want to prove that to you.
All right. Everyone, we have about 4 minutes left in the discussion this morning. I do want to continue to open it up for any questions that may come in from the audience. Let us know how we can help clarify any of the topics we talked about, or take advantage of some of the thought leadership we have on the call with us in terms of Brandon and Jason. So any additional questions, please let us know. In the meantime, while you're typing those out, I do want to talk quickly about some of our upcoming webinars. We've got a webinar around choosing the right cloud based on your workload requirements on the 19th of this month, as well as additional security, right? Diving a little bit more into zero trust and holistic security coming up on the 23rd of June. So look forward to seeing you all there. And I don't see any additional questions at this moment. So in that case, folks, I'm going to thank you for your time today. Appreciate you spending an hour of your day with us. Again, to echo what Jason said, we would love to actually demonstrate the value of these solutions to you and show you how you can increase your security and protection posture, and look forward to continuing the conversation offline. So with that said, enjoy the day, and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Thank you so much.